Hey, good morning and happy Sunday. I am your host, Tony Twist, ATW All Things Wrestling Podcast. And wow, we're a little late getting on. It's about quarter after. We usually go live at 12 p.m. Eastern. Has some technical difficulties. Gotta love technology. Joined by my host, Alex, the sports mouth of the 313, Detroit, Michigan. Good morning, Instagram. I'm at a couple different angles this morning because I'm actually at a different computer. So if you're on Instagram Live, jump over on Facebook and join us. And we have some awesome guests this morning or this afternoon, depending on what coast you're coming from. Alex, how you doing today, man?
I'm good, man. Good. I'm excited about today's show and just ready to get going.
Well, I hope you're ready to bring the fire. We got some really awesome guests. We have Sammy Kiss from Wildcat Sports out of Texas, pro wrestling commentator, and a man who knows his way around the squared circle. And we'll also be joined by the podcast host from the Call Up, Kenny Dinkins out of New York. So you ready to get this show started, man? I'm ready.
Yes, sir.
Okay. We are first going to be joined by Sammy Kiss. He is on his way. He's traveling, but he's joining us today. So let's bring him into the yard. Sammy, good morning. Uh-oh.
Good morning, guys. How you guys doing?
Good, man. How are
you? I'm doing good. Yeah, I'm traveling from Texas, East Texas, so not too bad, back to New Orleans. But I know we've been trying to put this together for a little while, so I'm happy to finally be on the show.
Well, thank you, man. Thank you for taking the time.
Man. We really appreciate it, and let's get this show started.
Great.
So, Sammy Kiss, Wildcat Sports, you're involved in a lot of different projects, man. Tell us all about what you got going on in Texas, all the different promotions. This is all things wrestling, so we want to hear how you got started in the biz, your passion for the biz, all that good stuff, man.
That's great. Yeah, for sure. I work out of a Wildcat Sports, which is the home promotion of New Orleans. We're really the premier wrestling promotion out of New Orleans. But over the last couple of years, obviously with the pandemic and a lot of issues, it's opened up a lot more opportunities for different states to do different things in response to that. I know you guys follow the wrestling business, that the pandemic really hit the independent scene of professional wrestling really, really hard. And Wildcat Sports was not immune to that. Every state with wrestling works a little different. And Louisiana has an athletic commission, which was very, very concerned with the pandemic and, enforcing certain guidelines, things like that. So we essentially were not able to run any shows for quite some time. We finally were able to get things back together and had our first show last July. And then right after that, Hurricane Ida happened and caused a lot of issues with different buildings we were running in and stuff like that. So unfortunately, Wildcat Sports is really trying to get our feet under us. But, 22, we're looking to start things off really fresh start, do a lot of new things. So we're hopefully going to be back with a vengeance really, really soon. But obviously, especially for someone like me, I like to be working all the time. So while, we were dealing with that, it gave me the opportunity to have some time to go work at a few other places. And the wrestling business in Texas has really been booming. Like in Texas and in Florida, there's all these new promotions that are popping up, and that influx of, the surge of popularity with AEW and different things like that for the business. There's a lot of promotions coming up in Texas that are doing a lot of things, and I've been lucky enough to be able to work with them recently.
That's awesome, man. I mean, yeah, I see the independent scene in Texas. I mean, it is business is good, right? I mean, there's just so many promotions out there, and we talk about this every week. I'm a big fan of the indie pro wrestling scene, and I follow tons of organizations really all around the world, not only the United States. And man, there's so much talent out there. Out of all the talent that you're seeing in Texas, what are some of the big names that hey, we need to be keeping an eye out for? Like, hey, we need to really watch for these guys. Like I said, man, the talent from coast to coast and really worldwide in the indie scene is just it's amazing right now.
Yeah, man. I mean, the first person that comes to mind right now for me is Roxy. She's the Ring of Honor women's champion. She
Yeah.
came out of Reality of Wrestling, Booker T's school out of Houston.
Okay.
I worked with her with New Texas Pro as well. I got to call a great match between Roxy and Killer Kelly just a few months ago. That was for the New Texas Pro and the Ring of Honor Women's Championship. And she's been making a lot of moves. It comes to mind because WWE just did a bunch of tryouts, and
Right.
she was a standout there. If you go look at all the young ladies that were there, so nothing's set in stone. I don't, I'm not sure how
Right.
that's going to go, but she may be making a lot of big waves, soon. Obviously, Ring of Honor just had their big send off last week. We don't know exactly
Right.
what's going to happen with them. I know that was also challenged by Deonna Purrazzo for the
boy.
Impact thing after Hard to Kill. So she's got a lot of stuff going on, so
That's
I'm really
awesome.
happy and proud of her. And then also, like, especially out of Texas, guys like Mysterious Q, Gino Medina, Brian Keith. Brian Keith in particular, he's just all over the place. That guy works nonstop.
I think he's got to be one of my favorite guys that I'm watching out of Texas.
Yeah. A lot of Booker T students that come out of his business. Ryan Davidson is a guy that's been around for a while. He's the Wildcat Sports heavyweight champion right now. Edge Stone is one of those guys that, him and Mysterious Q too, but Edge Stone is one of those guys that, like, you look at him and you go like, that guy should be on a poster. That guy should be someone that, is going to be a big thing just on his look alone. And then when you back it up with the talent that he has, Edge Stone's the guy that came out of New Orleans with Wildcat, but he's someone that's also taking advantage of, this big boom of popularity with wrestling in Texas and trying to get as much work over there as well. So there's a lot of guys out of Texas that are really great. A lot of guys in New Orleans too, like Luke Hawks, who does Wildcat Sports. Him and his son PJ Hawks have been making a lot of moves in the NWA. Wildcard J Spade, I know, just did a bunch of stuff up there. Another thing we've been doing, again, whenever one door closes, another door opens. While Wildcat Sports hasn't been doing stuff, Luke Hawks is a stuntman and a stunt coordinator as well. And he got the opportunity to be to run the wrestling side of things, coordinating the wrestling side for the Star Show Heels.
Oh,
so
right.
So
that was with Stephen Amell, right?
With Stephen Amell, yeah. So if you look at all the wrestlers on that show that aren't like the actor characters, they're all like Wildcat Sports guys. You can see Luke Hawks, Chuck Devine, Danny Flamingo. There's a lot of guys there. So there's a lot of things being moving. Like once one thing closes, another thing opens. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of stuff going on.
And Stephen Amell is a huge wrestling fan. I mean, that's that he's a big wrestling fan. I think CM Punk was involved with that show too, right?
He was, yeah. He did a kind of a spot show where he was like one character, and then he did so well that they brought him on for a few things, playing a guy called Ricky Rabies, which is like polar opposite of the CM Punk character. You can tell that he was having a lot of fun on that show. And he was doing that before he came back to AEW. So the whole time he was playing it up like, oh, I'm not, this is the closest thing to wrestling I'm ever going to do, blah, 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 keeping everything really close to the vest, which is pretty great. It's really great when you're able to keep a surprise like that. Like I think the fact that they were able to do that show where they did that show in Chicago and they never technically announced that he was going to be there.
Right.
And they sold it out on the faith that he was going to be, on the show. And then they delivered that, I think was really, really great. It was really something special.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that was huge, man. AEW's really, I mean, this has definitely been the year of AEW 2021 for sure.
Yeah.
And we got all kinds of stuff to talk about. Did you catch Winter's Coming?
I did catch Winter is Coming. Yeah, I thought it was a great show. What did you guys think?
I thought it was phenomenal. The Hangman Page Bryan Danielson match was I'd say match of the year.
I looked at.
We're gonna break down the show a little bit more when we bring on Kenny. But yeah, I thought it was a great show. What do you think, Alex?
All I know is my eyes was I was doing I didn't get to watch it till yesterday, and I was doing the other podcast, and I was still. I'm like, I'm sorry, guys. You know, I was like, I'm trying to watch a match, but I'm listening. I'm paying attention. I have to watch this because
Yeah.
time is limited. You know, with 5 hours of wrestling and all that, and then working and doing all the other stuff. But long story short, I looked at the clock and I was like, oh my God, they've been wrestling for an hour. This is
Yeah.
crazy. So I mean, they put on. I don't think nobody expected the match to go that long like that, but I kind
Well,
of knew the way it was gonna end once it got past like the 45-minute mark. I was like,
yeah.
okay, you know what I
If
mean?
you watch
So
it, like the pacing of it, you could tell they were probably going to go in for a long time. You didn't necessarily know it was going to go that long.
right.
Yeah,
But,
because I was actually irritated. Like the first 5 minutes, I was like, what's going on with this match? I was like, this shit is starting out real slow because when Brian wrestled with Omega, I mean, they got to it.
Yeah. But I like the pace of the match. You know, they started. You know, they worked their way into it just being an all out brawl. So basically, like, and
it was a
good
well paced match. I think that obviously people are upset about the finish, but I think that was the story that they were telling. You know, when you watch it back, you can see it there. It's a bittersweet time for me because you know I'm involved in the business now, but I'm also still a fan, and I try to watch the product like a fan.
Right.
But it's very, very difficult to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Especially like it's weird. So I do a podcast, or I did do a podcast called Nerds of Squared Circle, which again the pandemic kind of put the brakes on that, and we're still trying to get the wheels coming back on it. But my co-host on that show, Snarf Chris, every show, especially AEW Dynamite, he always asks me, like, did you see the show? Blah, 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 ask me my opinion. And there's this great hour-long Broadway that everybody's talking about. And the only thing I really ever have to say about it is that I just noticed how the commentary went, because that's what I do. Like, that's my bread and butter right now is I do commentary. So I listen to Excalibur and Tony Schiavone and things like that. So that's what I hang up on. And, you know, and I think all those guys are very talented, but all I do is critique and nitpick things like that. You know, I was like, there are all these commercial breaks. And it was a match that if we were up to me, I would have liked it to have been on later in the show. Just for little things like Excalibur had to pitch and talk about so much stuff going on later on in the show during that match. Where if it was on later, all that would have been over with, and they could have just focused on the match.
Great point.
You know, and those are little things that, like, it doesn't really affect the match if you're watching that.
But
no, I'm sorry. I was going to say, I think some of the booking of some of the matches have been kind of questionable. There was a match a while back where Bryan Danielson, I think they kicked off Rampage, and they were like all the crowd like pretty much left after, because I mean when they film Dynamite and Rampage, it's so much wrestling, and then after an hour match on Dynamite, you're like, the crowd is like, you're exhausted, right? After watching an hour match, you don't have any energy left for the remaining of the show. You know, I know they ended the night with MJF, the MJF match, and that was a really good match, but it's like, I question sometimes the match placement.
They have a good sense of who their main event grouping is. Like, there is a hierarchy amongst the talent on their show. I think some people like to accuse that they just kind of put everybody over, and to the degree that there aren't really any standouts, which I don't think is true at all. I think there is like a heavyweight division and a mid card and all those kinds of things.
Right.
And they do balance it out in that they don't ever put, like, people act like they put the main event on first and then it kind of slides down. They do usually put something strong at the end. It's just usually not as strong as the opener.
Right.
It's
hard
balanced,
to follow those guys. It's hard to follow a Bryan Danielson or a CM Punk, man. It's just
it's a different way of doing shows now. I feel like people more often than not are watching clips of things online. They're watching isolated moments. So I think the idea is we want people to come on, we want them to stick around, but we maybe don't expect them to. So let's put our biggest thing on first and then you at least saw that great thing. And
Right.
if you are a diehard, you'll stick around later. It's just a different way of looking at it than it used to be. And I'm old school. I like the idea of like the crescendo and the build, and you want to build up to it. Like, again, with this match, not taking nothing away from the match, but if the match was if the Daniel Bryan and Adam Page match was on later, then the whole show they could have been talking about that match. So by the time you got to it, you're anticipating it, you're building to it, and it just adds a little bit of extra. But the argument I would imagine they would have is like, well, yeah, but anyone coming on the show is already expecting that match anyway, so you don't really have to do that. I understand that it's just a different way, a different philosophy that I think some people are really into, obviously, but then a lot of people, it's like a love-hate thing. There are a lot of people that don't like it either. It's just, your cup of tea or not.
Yeah, no, and I totally think they could have swapped that MJF Dante Martin match. That could have kicked off the show. I mean, they would have been a great.
That would have been a good.
It would have been a great match to kick off the show. I totally get both sides of the argument. I think with the culture today, with the instant gratification, it's like, let's go ahead and just kick it off with Bryan Danielson and Hangman Page. So nothing to knock anything.
And that happens a lot in
that match because it was phenomenal. So.
Oh no. Yeah. I mean, like even in that specific match, I mean. And they didn't blow their wad like right away, like a lot. So like the first 5-10 minutes of the match with Daniel Bryan consistently like going into the ropes and like kind of stalling the momentum. There was a lot of a build within that match because you have to, if you're going to have a match that's an hour long, you can't just go in there guns a-blazing because matches have to have a crescendo.
Absolutely.
But so often now that argument of like, when people say like, there's too much flippy stuff in matches now. I don't think, or I would imagine for the most part, people that make that argument aren't saying that they don't like dives or they don't like that kind of high impact lucha libre or any of that kind of style at all. It's the idea of you don't want to do it all at once. I would make that argument with
pick your spots.
With my friends about like if the end of Endgame in Avengers is the greatest thing ever.
Right.
Why wouldn't you just do that big fight the whole movie? Right? Yeah. If that's the greatest part, like, why don't you just do that? Because it doesn't make sense. If that would get old. The only reason why it's so great is that you build to it and you have all these little moments before. So then when that finally does happen, it stands out more. And so that, I always think of it in those kinds of terms. That it's storytelling. Right. The idea of that, you build to the climax, you build to the big fight at the end.
And they took 10 years for that big fight.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So it's just, like you said, like instant gratification. And I don't think that, I mean, obviously there is a market and interest in that. It's not like people are doing this new kind of style and nobody is interested in it. There's obviously a big market and a big audience for it. It's just the argument, I think, of like, that old school mentality, which is weird to think of it as an old school mentality because it's really not, to me. I don't think of it as old school, but I think that's just the way people would categorize it, is that there's a modern way of doing things and there's an old school way of doing things. Like at Wildcat Sports, we're very old school in the sense of we take a like almost Mid-South wrestling approach to storytelling. We, like you learn the basics at our school and you don't even move on until your basics, which I love. Is like, that's a quote that like I always heard as a kid that Jim Ross would always say about guys that he was impressed by. He would always say they're fundamentally sound. He knows his basics. And I'm like, okay, whatever that means, and now I was like, okay, I get that idea of like, this guy can do all these crazy stuff, but he can't do a headlock or he can't do like an arm drag, things like that. Right. And then if you do those little things, I know my brother was a big detractor of AJ Styles. He did not think that guy was worth all the fanfare that he got for so long. Going back to even when he was in like WCW and then his long tenure and Impact and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But then only after like when AJ went to like New Japan and he was just getting older, he started doing less stuff and as a result put more focus on the things that he did do. I mean, he still does a lot of crazy stuff. It's just nothing compared to how he was when he was in the X Division and stuff like that.
Spots, though. He definitely,
And he did like just like a simple like suplex float over. And that one little thing, he did it so smoothly and so well, and it was so simple. And I bring, and he looked at it and was like, that was really, really good. And it's like, yeah, he knows what he's doing. Like, it's not like,
Right.
and I think people miss those little details. Those little details are the things that, like, a lot of guys, like, I mean, personally, I've always kind of noticed those little things. Guys like Eddie Guerrero, people like that, even Bret Hart as a technician, he does so many little things so smooth and so well that it just builds all the other things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Storytelling. I mean, that's the art of pro wrestling, right? Since day one. Sammy, thank you so much for joining us today. If you're just tuning in, we're live on Instagram. Come on over to our Facebook page, All Things Wrestling, ATW All Things Wrestling Podcast. We're live on Twitter. We're live on YouTube. So come on over, check us out. Sammy Kiss from Wildcat Sports is joining us this afternoon. We're kind of coast to coast. We're going to be bringing Kenny Jenkins on here pretty shortly from the Call Up podcast. So, Sammy, pro wrestling commentating. I'm assuming you're a lifelong wrestling fan. What brought you into commentating? Who influenced you?
Yeah. Commentary. I just did a show for Title Match Network for Hurricane Pro Wrestling last night. And I do solo commentary for Hurricane Pro, which is very challenging. I always get compared to Joey Styles because there's only so many commentators that are known for doing things alone. Right. And then I'll go back to Wildcat Sports, and I'm in a 3-man booth, usually with David Powers and Chris Harper, which is just talking about wrestling or talking about what's going on in a match alone versus trying to talk to 2 people at the same time. Very, very, very different. Personally, I think I'd rather, have 2-man booth, neither of those options, but that's so rare amongst things these days. I don't know what made that happen, what made that challenge change. The dichotomy of, Jim Ross and Jerry the King Lawler is, I think, held up as like the best example of a pair. I loved personally, my favorite commentary team was always Paul Heyman and Jim Ross, which was very short-lived, but as an example of 2 guys that really were their own character and really had their own voice of what was happening, and it really brought out the best of, I think, what was happening on screen. It doesn't get remembered as much because it happened during the invasion, the WCW, ECW thing, which people like to crap on. And what's unfortunate about that, because I was a young kid whenever that happened, even though it definitely wasn't the dream that people wanted it to be. It wasn't Goldberg versus Stone Cold. It wasn't the NWO versus D-Generation X. It wasn't any of like the big WCW stars. It was basically WWE versus guys that are WWE, but they're acting like they're in WCW, with Booker T and RVD. Like, those are the only big stars that really came out of that entire thing. As far as in-ring action, it's like WCW versus WWE doesn't feel like it's appropriate when it's Stone Cold versus Kurt Angle. Sure, but that's 4 pay-per-views straight of main events between Stone Cold Steve Austin and Kurt Angle. Like, that's not bad wrestling, So it's unfortunate that it doesn't get the appreciation I think that it deserves for what it was, even if it wasn't as great as it could be. But yeah, Paul Heyman and Jim Ross were definitely what I aspired to be. And I was never an athletic kid, even though I loved professional wrestling. So I always kind of looked at it in terms of, all right, well, I'm not an athlete, but I love pro wrestling. I want to get involved. So I always looked at it like, how could I get involved if I'm not going to be a wrestler?
Right.
And I was always into theatrics. I did theater. I did, art. There's photography. Jim Cornette and Paul Heyman, they got in via photography and different things. Like, they were guys that just tried to break in however they could, And then, George, say what you will about Jim Cornette,
I got a chance to meet him. He came down here. It was a few years ago. They did the Something to Wrestle With podcast, you know, Bruce Pritchard and Conrad Thompson, but Conrad
Okay.
Thompson couldn't make it, so Jim
Oh,
Cornette filled in, and I was like,
okay.
I gotta go, and I got to
Yeah,
meet
yeah,
him and Bruce Pritchard. I grew up at WWF era,
yeah.
Brother Love, and just, you know what I mean, Jim Cornette, and I'm just a fan of just nonstop
Yeah.
talking and commentary as well. So I'm
Yeah.
Jim Cornette's that's the guy, man.
Yeah, say what you will about Jim Cornette, but he never gives you the impression that he's pulling any of his punches. Like, you ask him a
Nope.
question and he will give you his opinion. You know, and
That and
I
more.
think that people always think that like he's dogging on stuff all the time. But if you listen to his podcast, it's really not true. Like, he gives a lot of praise to a lot of guys. He gives a lot of praise to AEW, which a lot of people think that he hates, like, from bottom top. There are certain guys there that he really doesn't care for, and there are certain aspects of wrestling that he doesn't care for. But he's not without giving positive attributes to things as well.
Right.
As opposed to, like, you know, you brought up Bruce Pritchard, you know, like, and I love listening to Something to Wrestle With as well. But Bruce, you can hear Conrad getting frustrated that Bruce, I think, plays the game a little different than Cornette does, which is why Bruce is in the position he's in and Cornette's in the position that he's in the sense that Cornette, I think, doesn't blow up bridges, but doesn't worry if he's going to say something that might do that, for better or for worse. And I think Bruce is someone who understands that he doesn't want to do that. So sometimes
corporate guy,
and I don't think he ever necessarily skirts the issue. He's just developed a mindset about it where he just doesn't go there on those kinds of things.
Very, very careful what he says when it comes to WWE as well.
Yeah, especially now, you know. And he was even doing that before he got rehired by them. But that's a testament to why he's someone that they would rehire, because he's someone that looks at the business through that lens in that way, you know. It's
and just as well as him going to, you know, was it TNA and you know, like he went there for a minute. So, like, you know, there was a reason why he got hired, you know. Obviously the podcast had a lot to do with it. They were number one for quite a while. So but it all worked out for him.
Well, hey, Sammy, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Being a wrestling commentator, if you could call a match with anyone, alive or dead, from any era, from any territory, who would be the dream guy by your side? Who would you want to call a match with?
Man, so when I first got into wrestling, and just as a person in general, I always gravitated towards the darker side of storytelling. Like, I always liked, I was not into Luke Skywalker. I was into Darth Vader. I was into the Disney villains as a kid. So I always liked the bad guys. So when I started thinking about getting into the business and thinking about, you know, if I was a commentator, things like that, I always saw myself as doing the heel, like, color kind of character.
Right.
But then once I got into it, especially because of this sense of knowledge that I have. I mean, at Wildcat Sports, I'm basically an encyclopedia. I know everything that happened to anybody ever. So I just kind of fell into this role of the play-by-play kind of Mike Tenay kind of character from WCW style of I can throw any fact at you that you need, which has transformed into this thing where I didn't end up where I really thought that I would. Like, I didn't think I would be good in the position that I'm at. I really thought that I would excel more in this other position. So for the longest time, I always thought of it like I would love to do commentary with someone like Jim Ross or even like Gorilla Monsoon.
Oh, man, that Gorilla Monsoon. I mean, I'm 41, so going back to when I was a kid, Gorilla Monsoon, Jesse the Body, and commentating.
Bobby Heenan. Bobby Heenan is the greatest of all time. I'm just throwing it out there. But
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but like, those are great, you know, just voices.
Yeah. And we've got so at Wildcat Sports, we've got a guy named Hardbody Chris Harper, who's like a Bobby Heenan, Jesse Ventura throwback. Like, he's someone that if he ever got to do commentary on a national level, you would fear that he was going to get canceled at any time. Like, he will say anything that he wants, you know, really pushes people's buttons. And so when I'm with him, I feel like I'm in an old throwback of like, I'm, you know, as if like I'm Mean Gene and he's Bobby Heenan kind of style, kind of commentary. So when you ask me that, like, for the longest time, it would have always been like Jim Ross. But I think now it would be someone like Paul Heyman from 2001 or Bobby the Brain Heenan or Jesse the Body Ventura, someone like that, someone that would pick on me and pick on the wrestlers and allow me to kind of defend them and do the "Would you stop Gorilla Monsoon" kind of commentary, which I do with him, which again is not what I ever thought I would be doing. But I think that's what I found is kind of my niche and is what I excel at. So I think I would say Paul Heyman, actually, just because he was someone that when he got kicked off, if you go back and watch the Raw after Survivor Series where he got fired,
right?
He and Jim Ross had developed this chemistry where it seemed like they really, really hated each other.
Yeah.
That when Paul is leaving, he goes back and takes one last shot at Jim Ross, and he kind of dives over the desk and he kind of flops on himself, and Jim Ross just starts like hammer fisting him, and it was like it blew my mind as a kid. I was like, and for the longest time, I was like, these guys genuinely hate each other.
Right.
Like it felt like if they had any, it's still hard for me to believe because that's how genuine the chemistry was. And Jim Ross has said it. It's like, well, he would know what to say that would really piss me off. They were colleagues and they didn't necessarily quote unquote get along. I mean, Jim Ross is a personality and Paul Heyman is a personality. Right. They don't seem like guys that would be friends in real life necessarily, but I don't think they ever actually genuinely hated each other, but they knew what to do to get the rise that they needed out of the other one. Yeah. That it came out so genuinely on screen that you have two commentators that are literally fighting each other.
Yeah, and you don't see that.
And it's the only because even as great as Jim Ross and Jerry the King Lawler were, and I think that they're probably the ones that people would say, if you had a vote, would be considered the greatest commentary team ever. They, as much as they would grind on each other and things like that, I don't think you would ever expect to see Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler actually fighting each other at ringside, As much as Gorilla Monsoon and Jesse Ventura got on each other's nerves, it never felt like one of them was going to swing at each other. Paul Heyman and Jim Ross felt like one of these guys is going to say something, and then you're going to not hear any commentary during this match because there's something going on over there. And it felt like that. And I always, looking back on it, it's a tension that's there that then it leans over into the matches that they're doing too. That because the great thing about the Alliance was it was so cut and dry that Paul Heyman was, this is my team. Essentially in AFC, NFC, this is my side, this is your side. I'm rooting for my side. You're rooting for like blatant bias, and it allowed them to take shots at each other that almost feels inappropriate now, unless you did sometimes when they do the SmackDown versus Raw matches, like a Survivor Series, and they'll have both commentary teams together. It'll sometimes feel like that, where I know a few years ago, when Taz was on SmackDown, he would always take jabs at people. That's another great one. Taz and Michael Cole. I think actually now in AEW, I think they do way too much. I think if it's not a 3-man booth, it's a 4-man booth or a 5-man booth.
And you got Mark Henry talking backstage and someone talking to the janitor outside. It's like, all right.
But when it's when it's Excalibur and Taz together, I think that's the best pairing that they have. I think that Tony Schiavone was great, but he was better in the role that Excalibur finds himself in now. Right. And now he kind of talks just like a fan, which is fine. Yeah. It's just he doesn't really, I don't want to say he doesn't really add anything in the sense, because he does. He adds a voice of the audience, which is very important. He's just he doesn't add what he used to. And I always appreciated that, that sense of and Jim Ross is kind of the same way there too, is that they brought in a bunch of guys that are all like these babyface they got 4 play-by-play guys.
Right.
Which you only need 1 play-by-play guy. You need, if anything, you want 3 color guys and 1 play-by-play. Right. Instead, they have it the other way around. So it makes them feel like they don't really know what to say. So they're all basically saying the same stuff. So it doesn't have that same energy that it has when you have someone like I'm talking about with Jim Ross and Paul Heyman, which Taz is the only one that seems to lean into that. Like he'll see like, okay, well, you guys are all talking about this, so I'll talk about this other thing because I'm on Team Taz, and I'll, not necessarily heal it up, but like fill the void that's not being filled,
Yeah.
I
Like
think WWE, you could say whatever you want about WWE's product right now, but I think from a commentating standpoint, I think they still got a decent formula. I'm more partial to the Raw team than the SmackDown team. I personally, sorry, but I hate Pat McAfee. I think he's fucking horrible.
So it's funny you say that. There's a student at Wildcat. I won't say his name, but he was a former comedian. And I have a lot of conversations with him about, like, obviously if you're a former comedian, that's important. And I mean, like, that's something you would lean into. And that's something, if you were cast as something, they would lean into that kind of thing. But wrestling is something that you at least need to sell as you're taking seriously, And ever since Pat McAfee kind of showed up, he always kind of points at Pat McAfee of like, well, look, like, Pat McAfee does it. I'm always like, Pat McAfee is Pat McAfee. Like, he's got his own show. He's a celebrity. Like, it's like he doesn't really count, And it gives him a license to kind of do whatever he wants. And I do like that it's allowed. He's so ridiculous and over the top that it's given Michael Cole the permission to be the serious person that he used to be. That even though I don't think Michael Cole has ever gotten back to when he was like that skinny muskrat guy with Taz, I loved Michael Cole with Taz, but ever since he moved to Raw, which has been 10 years, he's been very grinding because he's just pushing the WWE agenda. He doesn't feel as organic as he used to. And again, I think that's because of the foil. You need to have, someone on the other side of him to balance. You need the black to the white. You need the yin to the yang, And I guess you kind of have that with Corey Graves. Like you were talking about the Raw team. Like Corey, I think is the closest to that they have had in years, being someone that creates that balance of going against what the other one is saying, so that there's a conversation happening.
And Jimmy Smith on Raw, he's the newer addition, but I personally am a huge fan of Jimmy Smith. I think he sounds great. He's an MMA, background guy, and to me, it's funny because when he first came on, he sounds a lot like Joe Rogan, like his voice.
Yes,
like Joe
I know.
Rogan. Like, as I said, Joe Rogan on commentary.
If you squint at them, they kind of look alike too. Like they don't, but like
same shaped head.
Yeah. So he's got that kind of gruffness, and I guess it's that UFC kind of background too. That energy you bring to the way you talk about the explosiveness of different holds and things like that. And I love it when and when he's talking about guys like Matt Riddle, for obvious reasons, and different guys, he really shines because you can hear that kind of exuberance in his voice of like he knows what he's talking about when they do that kind of style of wrestling. Like if it's like AJ Styles and Matt Riddle doing like some kind of like doing all those kind of hold exchanges and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to beat up on Adnan Virk, but like he was in a really rough position to kind of learn on the job. It reminded me a lot of Mike Adamle, like someone who has sports experience, but you don't realize how much wrestling really isn't about wrestling, And especially when you're talking about, like, you have to know what wrestling is, and you have to know about the wrestling moves. You have to know the holds. You need to know that, but you also need to know that what you're talking about is you need to make sure that you react when this guy gets run into the posts so that we in the audience know that, oh, that's a big deal. And you need to know when this guy's in control, like that this guy needs to get up and invest. Those little things that if you're not a wrestling fan for years, you don't know instinctively to do those kinds of things. And I think that there's a sense that they can teach people that, but it just takes time. Like if he had been in NXT for a few years, I think he would have been fine, really. It's just that he started on Raw immediately. It's like, you're not even letting him like do a couple of shows like elsewhere just for a little while,
threw him in the fire. And I want to bring up somebody to you real quick. I want to bring up, the way you're talking about having to, like not just call certain moves, but if someone's gonna get, ran into the post, I mean, they could be knocked out. Like, and Mario Ronaldo is a guy that
Oh
was over the top, and a lot
God,
of people.
I loved Mauro Ronaldo. I
So did
loved
I.
Mauro
So did
Ronaldo.
I.
I loved when him and Josh Barnett, they used to call the when New Japan had their replays of shows on Access TV, it was
Right.
Mauro Ronaldo and Josh Barnett doing commentary over the Japanese stuff, because they've adapted now where they have like pretty consistent English commentary now with Kevin Kelly and and a bunch of different people that have come in. Rocky Romero, I know, is always really good over there. But but he was great, and especially in New Japan, because they would do those like standard main event in New Japan would be like 45 minutes. So it's always this big epic thing. So Mauro Ronaldo doing that big over the top dramatic thing always felt really, really appropriate. And then when he came here, I think when he was on SmackDown, it always fit like when it was the main event, but I can understand them being like a little unnerved by it when it was just like a normal stuff.
Yeah,
and then when he went to NXT, I thought NXT was a perfect fit, because that was exactly what NXT called for.
Really liked, when I really like listening to him, and I'm a huge boxing fan, so I've been watching him for a very long time. But and I was very excited when I was like, oh my, like I didn't know he was coming over to WWE, and when I seen him, I was like, oh my God, like I was blown away by that. But yeah,
it's weird that wrestling is always. It's not that it's not dramatic. It's just there's this sense to present it more realistically in the last few years, in the sense of, like I've heard people critique AEW has done a lot of finishes where someone gets in a submission hold and they tap out right away.
Yeah.
And that's not how it used to be. It used to be that you get in the hold and you're in the hold for a long time until they finally tap out. And the idea is the influence of, well, if you're in a real hold, like if you're watching the UFC fight and someone finally gets a hold in, you tap out, or they're going to break your leg, or they're going to break your arm.
Live to fight another day.
It's a different way of looking at it than the way submission holds were done just a few years ago. And I think that lends to commentary as well. I know a lot of people critique Jim Ross since he came to AEW, that he's not the same Jim Ross anymore. And part of that is that he's older, but it's also just that wrestling is just different now. Like, I don't think they want him to talk the way that Jim Ross talked during Stone Cold, Yeah,
I don't think Jim Ross has done a my God since coming in, right? My God.
And nobody does that. And I personally, I loved that kind of stuff. I loved watching, every single Raw, no matter what the angle was, Jim Ross was losing his mind, screaming his head off. He always sounds like he's got to drink salt water afterwards,
Yeah, for sure.
And it's just not like that anymore, even though personally, I love that stuff. And Mauro Ronaldo was a guy that really was kind of a throwback, that sentiment. But he got a lot of backlash from his peers and even from the backstage things, because it's just like, that's not what they're looking for anymore, unfortunately.
Right.
Well, Sammy, I could talk to you about this like all day, man. So I appreciate you joining us today.
Awesome.
We're about to bring on our next guest. But Sammy, tell everybody where we can find you online: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Where are you at?
Well, I'm on Instagram as the Sammy Kiss. I'm on Facebook as Sammy Kiss. I'm on Twitter, I believe, as the Sammy Kiss as well. I'm the guy with the microphone with the red lips on the side of it. You can also find me on Wildcat Sports. That's Wildcat with a K. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Nerds to the Squared Circle. And then, obviously, I can plug all the promotions. It's unfortunate. I just want to plug, Hurricane Pro, Title Match Network, New Texas Pro, Reality of Wrestling, so much good stuff. I'm really blessed that I'm getting a lot of opportunities to work with a lot of different promotions and things like that. I was just with WrestleCade a couple weekends ago and worked with a lot of promotions that were up there. So it's a really exciting time in the business. There's so much visibility to so many promotions. And that's what's great, is that it feels like just a few years ago, I really would need to like spell out my handle so you would be able to find me. But like, it's so accessible now that I'm blessed. I can just like, well, just look Sammy Kiss up on all the social media and you should be able to find me, which is great.
I found you real quick.
That's great. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Sammy. Thanks again, and we'd
Yeah,
love
thanks
to hang
again,
out,
man.
man. I know you're
Appreciate it.
traveling, but if you can hang out for a little bit, we're about to bring Kenny, the host from the Call Up podcast, on.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and bring him into the yard. I would say good afternoon, Kenny, because you are in New York. Is that right?
Yes, I am.
Thank you so much for joining us, man. How you doing today? Are you hearing everything? It's been a real interesting show. Bringing
Sammy, definitely. He has a lot of knowledge.
So, man, it's been a big week of wrestling. But first of all, tell us who you are, where we can find you.
Okay, so my name is Kenny Dinkinson from the Call Up podcast. I am from Brooklyn, New York. My show is pretty much, I do reviews, but I also do interviews. So I started about maybe like a year and a half ago, just interviewing different people, from like, Thunder Rosa to Mickey James, Kyle O'Reilly, Moose, Rich Swan. I mean, this is like a ton of other people, but like my main focus is just interacting with other wrestling fans. That was like the whole premise of my show. I started it through the pandemic because we were locked in the house, so we couldn't talk to anybody. We couldn't go anywhere. It was just the people in your house. So the last thing I wanted to do was to bug my wife with a whole bunch of wrestling stuff that she does not want to hear at all. So I decided to come online and start talking to other wrestling fans, and I got on Zooms and StreamYard and wherever else I can host a whole bunch of people to have these conversations. And ever since then, it's taken off. It's been doing very well, and I'm glad to like meet people like you guys, where I could keep discussing one of the things that I love.
That's awesome, man. So yeah, I'm assuming you're a lifelong wrestling fan coming out of New York. That's the home of WWE, WWF. What's your take on WWE today? I don't know if you caught SmackDown, but Roman Reigns super punching Paul Heyman. Looks like that story is taking a big twist. So, what's some of your favorite stuff to watch right now, man? You named some big wrestlers. Moose, I'm a huge fan of Moose.
Yeah.
Seeing that guy, on a bigger stage soon.
Oh yeah. So being from New York, you get to see like a lot of wrestling. So I love going to like a lot of indie shows, and obviously like when WWE comes into town, I like like going to those shows, especially like now AEW has been in New York for like a good couple of times here. I've been to like pretty much all the shows that they've done so far. As far as WWE, like just I don't know, like I just feel like they're onto something, like they're trying to plan something out, but it's like the fans just don't understand what exactly it is. Like I said it a couple of days ago. It was like, yeah, back in 2018, they all sat there on a Monday and told us, we're going to give you what you want. We're going to give you better matches, better segments. We're going to start listening to you guys more. And, for some time, they did give us some amazing matches. We have NXT takeovers. We had some really great, Rumble matches, some really great returns. And then it was just like, I always call like the relationship, like when you're in high school or you meet that one person and they said, I'm not going to hurt you. Just give me one more chance. And like you say, yes, okay, like let's work it out. And then they're good for a couple of months, maybe a year. And then little by little, they start declining back to like their old ways. So like that's what WWE is doing right now. It's just like, yeah, we're going to give you top matches. We're going to give you better superstars. We're going to start bringing in all these indie people that you guys love. And then little by little, we're going to pull it away from you.
Right.
They should
redo that. We're going to give you what you want, and they change it. We're going to fire everybody you like.
Exactly. So like now you see that like, in the course of the last couple of months, throughout this whole entire year, we've lost so many great talent. And then we always hear like the same thing is budget cuts. But then you tell us that you guys made more money through the pandemic than you did if you had live shows. So that caught me off guard there, right? And then you have like really diehard WWE fans that don't watch any other product at all. They only watch WWE, and they say, well, it's just like if you had a job, and like I understand that it is a business, but at the same time, if you look at it, I really think that at the time that WWE was signing like all these big names, it was just to hold them there.
Yeah.
So like
Right.
AEW or like MLW, who was like, you know, really getting up there, and like ROH,
Yeah.
you know, they couldn't snag any of these people. So they couldn't beat WWE at their own game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So of course you're gonna hold somebody like Matt Riddle, you know, Keith Lee, Karrion Kross, and so on, just to name a few people, you know, just to say like, okay, we have these guys, you don't have them. Let me see what you can do. You know, and then you bring, so then all of a sudden AEW comes around and says, well, we can get Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, Darby Allin, Eddie Kingston, and so on, and we're gonna build these guys bigger than what you have, and they've been doing a great job. So now WWE sits there and says, you know what, shit, we can't do anything about this. We just holding all these guys. We might as well just let them go. And then I think that's what little by little what's happening, and you know they're just like reverting back to their old ways. Like now we got NXT 2.0, which is, it's like for me, I feel like it's a mixture of what we used to get in NXT with all the games built in with like, hey, we just signed all these people from college. We're going to throw them on TV and see what happens from there. Like, is USA Network going to love it or they're going to hate it? And I think at this point, you know, just reading reports, and I can't really go off of too much reading off of reports, you know, because it could be, you know, bullshit at times. But like USA probably is not happy right now with what they're getting, and and it's gonna show when it comes time to renew that contract for NXT, where they're probably gonna pull out, and we're just gonna get NXT on Peacock, and that'll be it.
Which I think if it goes back to Peacock, that's the best. I mean, if they want it to be, I don't think there's anything wrong with the developmental. I remember when FCW turned into NXT before the network even existed, and they would only play that on local TV in Florida, but there would always be a couple of people that would pirate the show and they'd put it online, and I was one of those guys that would go on and try to watch because they would put it on at like 1 a.m. And by the next day they would pull it, so you'd have to like go in there and try to watch it real quick. And that was back when like Dean Ambrose and Seth Rollins were there, and Bray Wyatt was first starting to do his thing. But the idea was that they didn't want it on television. They didn't want anybody to see it, so that they could bring those guys to television and do what they wanted with it. The double-edged sword of when NXT started being visible is that people around the world got interested, got invested in it. They care about these characters. It's its own roster now. So then you get this big backlash that, like, if no one knew who Karrion Kross was, if no one knew who Keith Lee was, if no one knew who these characters were before they showed up on Raw and SmackDown, it wouldn't have been the same reaction that it ended up being. And that's the way it always was. I think one of the biggest problems that they have is that they change things, but then they act like they didn't, you know?
Exactly.
Like if you're going to make NXT 2.0 and make it a developmental system again, that's fine. But a developmental system should not be on prime time television on USA. Right. Like NXT wasn't that anymore. It was a new brand. So I can understand them being frustrated that like they kept looking at NXT like it was developmental when it wasn't anymore. You know, that they were like, we should be able to bring Keith Lee up and Karrion Kross and do whatever we want with them because they're just developmental guys in NXT. They're not. They're on the same network that Raw is on. Right. You can't treat them like that anymore. So they said, okay, well, we're not going to treat them like that anymore. We're going to make them developmental again. It's like, okay, well, now you have new issues because now you've got developmental on prime time, and people are like, this doesn't feel like it's good enough to be in this slot. Which is nothing against them. Like, they're new guys and they should get the chance to work with older talents and work and develop and stuff like that. I think Braun Breaker's got a great upside and all that stuff, but it's like,
he's going to be a big star in 2.0.
Oh yeah.
It's just one of those.
I mean, with that being said, Sammy, I mean, when you bring up guys to the main roster and then you're fucking with their name, like Keith Lee's Bearcat Lee, Keith Bearcat Lee, the Bearcat, the Bear. It's like, what are they doing? Like, if this character's working on NXT and they got a big following like Karrion Kross, he shows up on Raw, they don't do his entrance like on NXT. Everyone loved, right? With his wife and everything.
Well,
and they bring on
well, that's the thing is that if you watch, they did a great documentary recently on the Ruthless Aggression era, which chronicled the beginnings of their developmental system. And if you look back at guys like that were like maybe the best crop of students they ever had, Randy Orton, John Cena, Batista, Brock Lesnar, all were a class together learning how to bump together. That's insane.
Crazy.
You know?
Yeah, that's like an all-star cast right there, man.
All of those characters, all of those wrestlers that I just named, when they came up to the main roster, none of them were the same character on the main roster that they were when they were in development. That's the way they've always done it. Vince McMahon is too busy. Like, people give him crap that like he doesn't watch his own product. That's not his job. His job is SmackDown and Raw. The idea of developmental is like, you get me some guys ready, and when I need some new people, send me some guys, and then I'll do something with them. So the idea of developmental is like, this works, we'll figure it out. But then when you go to the main roster, it's basically starting over. The issue is that in NXT, like, you have Bayley, who has all this great developmental in NXT, and then she comes up to the main roster.
Great example.
And it's like she's starting over. And people are always like, well, you can't act like people don't know her because they did all this stuff here. It's like, well, that's not the mentality. And that was the issue, is like deciding whether or not it's developmental or it's his own brand. And even though they would say it's his own brand, they never really committed to that, I don't think. So this idea of like Karrion Kross, all that stuff worked. I mean, I'm right there with you. I thought his presentation with Scarlett and all that stuff is
beautiful.
What it was great. But they do this weird backwards, not necessarily backwards, but just they've always done this thing of they want to see if you can make it on your own. It's like this weird test of like they purposely will kind of crap on you to see if you can overcome it.
And in your own hometown at some
which I don't I think most people watching that have been watching as long as we have don't necessarily subscribe to that philosophy, but I get it. I remember when Daniel Bryan won the world title, main event of WrestleMania. Daniel Bryan's now going to be A+ player. He's not a B+. He's going to be the guy. His first feud, he's with Kane, and he's getting kidnapped in the back of an ambulance and stuff like that. I remember arguing with someone online. I was like, man, I thought Daniel Bryan was going to be champion, and they were going to like have like all these great technical wrestling matches like he did in Ring of Honor. I'm like, no. WWE does a specific thing in the main event, no matter who's in the main event. It's not, they don't cater to the wrestlers cater to them. You know, and that's something that AEW does very differently, which, for better or for worse, whether you like them or not, they go, okay, and NXT did this too. What is good about you? Okay, that, and we're going to lean into that. You know, like if Baron Corbin, if you can't do a lot, we're going to have you do that thing where he only had like matches for like 2 minutes, right? That was a big thing. And Baron Corbin was over like gangbusters in NXT.
Oh, yeah.
Because they were protecting him in that way. But when you're in the main roster, the philosophy is we've got a card. This match has to go this long. This match has to go this long. We think that this kind of story is what draws for our bigger market. So if you're in the main event, you need to be able to do these kinds of stories.
You got to keep readapting and all that.
Yeah.
Like,
it's just so that's why they say like this guy's not going to be in the main event. It has nothing to do with you. It's that our main event is always going to go this way. So if you're going to be in it, you need to be able to go this way. And if you can't be there. So it's this weird thing of like, okay, you come up, people say you're great. Okay, well, go out there and be great with when you only have this. And if you can't do that, then maybe you're not that so great. I don't like that in the sense of like, it feels like you should support them and make them look as best as they can. Like it feels like self-defeating.
Right, exactly.
If that's your homegrown talent, why would you set them up for failure? You know, back in the day, WWE was guilty of bringing over guys from WCW and squashing them.
Yep.
Right? They were totally. It was like them making pay dues all over again. It's like this doesn't make sense. You know what I mean?
When AJ Styles came into WWE, he debuted in the Royal Rumble, right?
Right.
He came in number 3. He wasn't number 2, and he wasn't number 30. He was number 3.
Yeah.
And I remember after the match, if you go back and watch it, AJ Styles gets his ass kicked in that match. He bumps every single person that comes. He lasts for like about 30 or 40 minutes, and every single person that comes in does something to him. Like AJ Styles does not come off like someone that kicks ass in that match. He comes off like someone who gets the shit beat out of him. And I remember a lot of people critiquing that. They're saying like AJ Styles was coming in. He's supposed to be this big star, and they're making him look terrible because he's just getting his ass kicked by everybody.
Right.
But to me, look at it from AJ's perspective. He was Mr. TNA. He was Mr. Impact Wrestling.
Right.
And he came in as a surprise. So, like, he had just been in the Tokyo Dome, like, a couple of weeks ago. Like, he had just left New Japan. So, he wasn't there for, like, months, stuff like that. He was surprised. So, he got there. He doesn't know anybody. You know? He's, like, this invading guy. So, from his perspective...
Like Chris Jericho.
Yeah, so his perspective was, you know what? He went in there, and he worked with everybody. From his perspective, it was, hey, what do you want to do? Whatever you want to do, I'll do it. Cool. Whatever you want to do. He had his first WrestleMania. What does he do? He loses to Chris Jericho. And you know what he does? He does it with a smile on his face, like, yeah, cool, whatever you guys want. Yeah. He goes right into a WWE title feud with Roman Reigns. Loses both times. The whole time, the internet's crapping all over everything. It's like, they're going to ruin AJ Styles, they're going to ruin him, blah, blah. But from his perspective, he's whatever you guys give me,
he's giving
I'm going to do it.
That rub,
and because he did that, Vince McMahon was like, I like this guy. And then 4 months later, he was WWE champion. You know?
Right.
Like, I'm not saying that, like, I agree with it, but that's clearly their mindset is like, what I'm going to give you this. What are you going to give me when I give you that? And AJ Styles was the guy that came in that took what they gave him and just ran with it, and he was rewarded for it. Where there are other guys, even if they're in the right, that they're like, this is what's working, and they go like, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this. Look what happened to Hit Row, which was like the greatest thing they'd ever done in so long. And the second they were like, you know, like, because like BFAB was not ready to go to the main roster. That's their own fucking problem for bringing them up. But sorry, I didn't mean to curse. But like, so when they let her go,
you show, man, curse all you want. All right.
So when they let her go, it like ruined the dynamic. But because that, you know, like I feel like, you know, they might have shot themselves in the foot by talking about it, being like, hey, you can't do this to us. This is going to ruin it. They're like, oh, okay. And then bye-bye. That's terrible. But they've always been a company that, for better or for worse, want you to play ball with them. Because wrestling has got a lot of egos, a lot of hotheads. Everybody wants to be the main event. Everybody thinks that they're great. The way you show that you can play ball is to say, hey, whatever you want to do, I'm good. You know?
Because I feel like they didn't have somebody who was going to be there to write for this group.
Yeah,
like they brung them up way too early. You know,
I agree.
They kind of said to themselves like, well, you know, if the New Day could do it, like we can probably do it with them. But the difference with the New Day is like in the beginning, WWE Creative wrote for New Day. You know, and it was like
they were established already.
So imagine if like Big E and Kofi and Woods would have never said like, you know what, like let's do it our way, you know, and went to Vince McMahon and said like, let us do it our way and it's going to work. And Vince saying, fine, if it sinks, then it sinks and it's on you, you know.
But and that's another good point is that like I know like if you look at like what Woods wanted to do, like if before they actually were the New Day, when they were like first hooking up and Woods was like wearing like his snarky glasses and was like being like that like super stuck up like kind of nerdy character. That's not what they ended up doing. Like they went away and then they came back with like the choir and the preaching and all that stuff. And the impression I always got from Woods is that they pitched their idea. Vince said, well, I want to do this. Yep. And their attitude was, well, we don't think that's going to work, but if that's what you want us to try to do, we're going to do it and we're going to do it the best we can. So they did that and they were rained in New Day sucks chants and everyone rejected it. But they didn't go, Vince, we told you. They went, oh man, this isn't working. Maybe we did this. It would, and they ended up turning it. And then little by little, you know, I don't want to put it all on everybody. Every character little thing that they did, it always just felt like that's so Xavier Woods. That then by the time it got to, and then every little thing they did, they got more popular. They sold more merch. They made more money.
When they started doing the hip things and all this, I was, you know, me being an old school fan, I was just like I get it, I got it, you know, it's entertainment and all that.
Yeah.
But I was like, some things can be a little cringy.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and that's the thing with that.
I'm watching it one day, you know, my daughter being funny, and I'm starting wiggling my hips and start dancing and just having fun with it, man.
But you think about it like this, right? So like New Day being the trio that they actually checked off the box that Vince McMahon wanted. Like they literally checked off everything. You're a great tag team. You're great trios. you make the kids laugh, you're bringing families in, right? And you're doing silly shit like throughout the whole entire time,
selling
right?
merch, all that good stuff.
And each one of you guys can take on different levels of talent in WWE. You know, Big E can handle a big guy. Woods is a really good high flyer. You know, so for Kofi Kingston, I know sometimes they say he's a good high flyer, but I think he's more of a good technical person than anything else.
I agree.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So like for Vince, it was like, oh my God, I can use them for anything. You know what I mean? And that's why, for me, I feel like they gave them that freedom space to say, like, okay, you guys can do this, but I need you to sprinkle in this. You know what I mean? Like, you guys can be tag team champs, but I want you to be like extra silly. Oh, you want us to be extra silly? Right. We're gonna come out in a big ass freaking cereal box, you know, looking like freaking Goku and stuff like that, and looking like freaking we're sitting here for like Dragon Ball Z, and we're gonna give you that freedom, but I need you to do this, like. Yeah. Okay, like you want to host WrestleMania, that's great, but here's a ice cream cart, and I need you to go down there. If you fall, you on yourself. But that's it. You know what I mean? Like stuff like that. You know, and
there's some
I don't know. Like I think maybe WWE Creative just needs to like go back to the drawing board with a lot of these guys, because I know you guys mentioned like, you know, the way they changed Keith Lee and Karrion Kross, and just like when those guys came up the first day, like when we seen them coming, like the vignettes for it, we was so happy for them. Yeah. And then when the music hit, we was just like, the hell is this? Like, it's like going to a restaurant and you like, man, this steak looks really good. Like, it sounds good. And all of a sudden you just get this little piece and you're like, what is this? Like, this is not what I expected, you know?
Yeah. Well, hey, let's switch gears. There was a big show this week, AEW Winter's Coming. Yes. Phenomenal show. We talked about it briefly at the beginning of our show. Kenny, what's your take on Hangman Page, Bryan Danielson? I'm not sure if you catch our show, but if you know our show, everyone knows I'm a huge Bryan Danielson fan. Love Bryan Danielson. I was calling, hopefully he was going to get it, but they went to a draw. It was a phenomenal match, an Iron Man match when it wasn't being pitched as an Iron Man match. What's your take on it, man?
I thought it was great. I didn't think that it was going to last that long. You know, I had a feeling that maybe something else was going to happen. Either somebody was going to interfere in the match. They were going to continue on to build this storyline, especially, you know, how like they always make the joke now that if you're in a title picture, it ends up being like a triple threat match because Daniel Bryan is involved. And I thought maybe they might use that in reverse to do this. But I thought it was a great build up to lead into this match for Winter is Coming. Just how like every city he went to, you had to like go through a Dark Order person. So it was almost like a video game level. It was almost like it was like Mortal Kombat. You know, you have that level up, and you're like, okay, I'm in Detroit, I'm fighting this guy. I'm in Chicago, I'm gonna fight this guy. And he, you know, pretty much was like telling Hangman, like, I'm gonna destroy all your friends until I get to you. Until you have to come into the ring, and you have to face me. You know. And I know before, like you guys were saying, you kind of wish it like it was coming close to the end where you can like throughout the night build up to the match itself. But I thought it was genius of just having them come out first and do it, because we kind of did build up to this match coming in first. Like every single week, Hangman could not touch Daniel Bryan. Daniel Bryan couldn't touch Hangman Adam Page, and like Hangman had to watch his friends get destroyed week by week by week, and listen to Daniel Bryan say, or Bryan Danielson, sorry, like I'm gonna continue until I get to you, until like I kick your head in. And if you look at like, you know, I was looking back at like both matches. I saw Hangman's match against him, and then saw Kenny's. Like you've seen a different Bryan Danielson in these matches. Like when he fought Kenny Omega at Grand Slam, it was more like Kenny Omega had more control, and he was just trying to be the person to fight back. And then you look at this one from like on Winter is Coming, he literally was just like the one just going after Hangman every single time. Like we kind of saw that old school, you know, American Dragon Danielson that we saw in the Indies. You know what I mean? Like he's just little by little erasing the Daniel Bryan that we knew from WWE.
He's such a beloved wrestler that people forget how great of a bad guy he is. Exactly. How often he is a bad guy. I mean, he was a bad guy multiple times, even in WWE. But people don't really even think about that because of how much people love him
Exactly.
Whether he's a good guy or a bad guy. Like even when he was a jerk, people still loved how awesome he was as, you know, that asshole.
Yeah.
Well,
When he came out, you know, I had told Tony, I said, you know, when he did, I like to pat myself on the back and say, like, I called it like 2 weeks prior, him turning back, because he was already coming out. He wasn't, you know, he was serious every time he comes out. He wasn't smiling and everything. I mean, just his punches, his kicks are just. He had some extra.
Mm-hmm.
He was just a totally different guy. You could see it from day
Well, you
one.
know,
And
I think to me, even though I think there was a lot of groundwork there,
right.
even though I do think that when he came out after Full Gear and just straight up, not really turned heel, but just was a heel all of a sudden, people accepted it, even though it kind of felt like it was out of nowhere.
It was so quick. It was like,
but
wow,
to me,
he was so good.
my opinion is that that's because this entire program, this entire build of Daniel Bryan going through the Dark Order, they had all the cities booked in a row for Dynamite where they all happen to be places where the Dark Order members are from. That's not a coincidence. This has been a plan for months. The problem, though, and what I think, I don't know this, but my assumption is that it wasn't supposed to be Daniel Bryan. It was supposed to be Jon Moxley. Because Jon Moxley was being more and more vicious. He was being more and more violent ever since he lost the title. And if you remember in the qualifier to get to Full Gear, he already beat 10 from the Dark Order.
Yep.
Right.
So what
like 2 minutes or something.
So my expectation was that he was going to go on. He was going to beat Daniel Bryan at Full Gear, and then he was going to turn heel there and just be vicious until he got to Winter's Coming, where he lost the title last year, and fight Adam Page. And then that's why it kind of feels like, because it felt like Daniel Bryan was still doing stuff with the Super Click, and then he suddenly wasn't anymore. And now it kind of feels like the Super Click doesn't really know what they're doing. Like they're doing stuff with the best result of that. I think it's because when Jon Moxley checked him out, and, you know, God bless Jon Moxley, and, like, you know, obviously he did what's best for him. But it shows that they had a lot of plans that kind of got through into whack. And they're like, well, John's gone and we're going to do something big with him. So let's put Daniel Bryan there.
We need another heel.
There. So then because he's there, what we were going to do with him, we can't do. So we got to figure out something else over there. So it's like, and it works fine. Like it all is working out great, but you can see the bones of like where things were. And it's a testament that they were able to have someone like Bryan Danielson who can be like, oh yeah, I can do that, and just go with it, and it's great. But then it also creates that great sense of like, well, now I don't know what to do, because Bryan Danielson's challenging for the title, and you would expect Bryan Danielson to come in, that if anybody could win the title, it would be him.
Right.
You know, where does it go from here? You know, I really didn't expect Adam Page to lose, but I didn't, but then how do you have Bryan Danielson lose too? And I think that's a good question to have. Well, the real question is what's happening in the next one.
We had kind of talked about maybe making a prediction, but kind of going along with Bryan Danielson's been doing some interviews lately where he's talking about starting a faction. So I thought he was kind of peppering that in, and maybe if people were paying attention, and then somehow, you know, hey, there's a lot of guys on the market right now. Maybe somebody's surprised and they show up in AEW at that event, and then they cause Hangman to lose. So if Bryan beats him and it's not a clean win, it doesn't take anything away from Page. And then these guys can feud for like a while, depending on, you know, who interferes in the match. And then Bryan starts the faction, and then he's got this thing going on versus the Dark Order and Hangman Page. I mean, these guys could go for like, you know, a while. I mean, some of the greatest feuds, you know, back in the day in Attitude Era. I mean, these guys would be feuding with each other forever. I don't like the whole kind of one and done, or maybe two and done, and they move on to the next guy, and the next guy, and the next guy. Really go. I mean, shit, milk a feud for as long as you can. Especially if these guys can go, right? So if Bryan has somebody interfere, Bryan starts his faction. He's now the heel champ in AEW. Then you have Hangman chasing him. And, you know, I think they could have maybe did something with that. I thought maybe that's why Bryan was kind of talking about it in interviews over the last few weeks. He keeps talking about a faction starting.
I think it's weird that. Well, I think it's weird that people it's WWE's fault more than anything during the pandemic of people complaining about rematches so much that people are tired of rematches. Rematches are antiquated. It's not that rematches are bad. It's just you can't have a match and have someone win and then the next show just do the match again and not act like it already happened. Like you have to acknowledge it in some way. It's not about not having rematches. Is that if you just had Adam Page beat Daniel Bryan, and then the next week they just had another match, and the commentary didn't really even acknowledge that the last week happened, you'd be at home going, okay, so did last week not matter? Because if last week didn't matter, why should tonight matter? You know? And that's the problem, is that if it feels like what happened before didn't count, then you start to not care about what you're watching now, because you know by the time we get to the show next week, what's happening right now isn't important at all. So that it's not about not doing rematches, it's about making sure that even if it's the same match, you could have two guys that wrestle really well wrestle each other every week, and as long as you tell a story that, like, okay, you know, I remember earlier in the summer there was like a couple of matches between Bryan Danielson and Cesaro when he was still in WWE, and I thought, like, you guys could do this every week. Like, literally. And Cesaro could lose every week, and I would believe it and be fine. Like, and every week he's like, you know what? I'm going to challenge Bryan Danielson to a match on SmackDown every week until I beat him. And they could do that for 6 months, and I'd be great, because those are the kind of guys that could have a different match and do a different thing every single week, and it'd be great. It's not about, you know what I'm saying? It's like, it doesn't matter about the rematch.
Story and make you care.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I think AEW is doing some great storytelling. Going back to Winter is Coming. Kenny, what do you think about that? Sammy, you guys asked the same question. Match of the year candidate?
I would say definitely a match of the year. You know, I mean, obviously it's going to be fresh into to people's brains, being that it's so new. We've had like a ton of matches, you know, some like really amazing matches throughout the year, but that will definitely be one of them that I would put in that category of match of the year.
If I had to pick one right now, I'm gonna go with MJF and Darby Allin match for match of the year. I thought that was a great match. Open up the show. I think that was their best match in AEW with both of them, and that I loved it. I loved it. And MJF, like, I know he can go, but you only see him wrestle when he wants to or when he has to, like, as he would say. But he opened up my eyes big time. I was like, okay, because that's what a lot of people have been waiting for. You know, he's great on the mic. Like I said, I'm fine with just watching him talk, and I don't even need to watch him wrestle. But I'm just, you know, the mic guy. I love the talking and all that. I'm a big promo guy, but yeah, I loved that feud, and I even thought they could have carried that on a little bit more, but you know, they obviously got bigger things going on with MJF. So.
Yeah, Sammy, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if we're talking about for the whole year, you know, there's so much. I think we're all really, really spoiled now as wrestling fans for how much wrestling there is in the world. You know, like, especially now, like, you know, I'm so busy. You know, I barely have time to watch anything where, like, I can invest. Like, I can't remember the last time I watched a show I wasn't doing something else at the same time. I'm usually like writing about some show I'm about to do or I wasn't going to do, and while it's happening, things like that. So, you know, I really wish this was around when I was a kid. You know, like I'm really envious of all the young fans that get to come on and watch stuff like this and get to watch guys like Bryan Danielson and Adam Page. What happened? How often did you ever see hour-long matches ever? There was that one match with like Shawn Michaels and John Cena on WWE title like a few years ago. As terms of like not an Iron Man match, not a 2 out of 3 falls match, not, you know, it's a genuinely just a one-on-one match, and it just happened to go an hour. You know, like that's very, very it's very rare. So I think for that novelty alone.
What's wrapping up, Kenny or Sammy? So gun to your head, what would you say would be your candidate for match of the year? Maybe not
Match of the year for AEW, to me, it's Darby versus CM Punk. It was CM Punk's first match back, and I thought he delivered in spades. And the story of that match, I thought Darby Allin is a guy that is really, really over, is really, really interesting. And all the issues that people have with him is things like his size. He doesn't look like someone that maybe would be able to beat someone up in a fight. And CM Punk had a match with him that made you believe that and made you believe he could beat him. And everything that Darby Allin did in that match looked vicious and made sense and was like, it was a perfect match for that. There were all these callbacks in that match to the Bret Hart 1, 2, 3 Kid match for good reason.
Wow.
And
that was such a great match too.
like, you know, like if you watch those matches side by side, there are a couple of parts in it that literally are actually happened in that match. Like little things like there's like an arm drag that Darby does on the Punk, and Punk has his expression afterwards. That's the exact same thing that happened that Bret Hart did. Like little things like that. They're great. So for my money, it would be that match. Punk and Darby.
Punk and Darby. Yeah, dang.
We're spoiled. Like there's just so much great wrestling, so many great matches. It is tough to pick one. And I think Kenny hit it right on the head, being it kind of fresh in our mind, kind of thinking of Hangman Page, you know, Bryan Danielson. I thought the Omega Bryan Danielson match was phenomenal. Yep. I could watch those guys go and go and go and go. It's a lot different match than the Bryan Danielson Hangman Page. Go ahead, Kenny.
There is a match like for like, you know, when we talked about like match of the year and stuff like that, that I always go back to, and I always say like out of all the matches that I've seen this year, that this is one of my favorites, and that was Josh Alexander versus TJP for the X Division title. Like if you go back and watch that,
I didn't catch that one, and when I heard
you
about
know,
it,
you know what's sad is that a lot of people did not watch this match, and for me personally, I think that's like match of the year for me, just because like they told a story before the match, and they told a story during that match, like through every hold, through every move, and even towards the end, like, you know, like even like with the finish, like I always go back to that and say like, that's my match of the year. And that happened like in January of this year.
Yeah.
So imagine that I'm still considering
there's so much going on. I mean, there's also, to me,
I'm gonna have to watch that.
Yeah, to me, the TakeOver 36 Walter versus Ilya Dragunov match.
You know, that was another one too.
That match,
yes,
which may end up ironically being the last TakeOver show ever. You know, like, and if that's the last NXT TakeOver show they ever do, that's a great match to send off on. You know, so you know, there's a lot of good stuff.
The way they were hitting each other was just like, I was like, is this a New Japan like match? Just like, you know, and then they did it again, and obviously it's kind of hard to follow that up, but I think they did, even with the second,
I think they did,
rematch. I mean, I was just blown away by that. You don't see that. You just don't see those type. Like I feel like that's something that Vince McMahon might not even allow in the WWE on Raw or Smack, like for some reason. So that was definitely, I almost forgot about that match, but how could I?
Well, since you brought up WWE, we'll kind of switch gears and jump over, talk about Monday Night Raw and SmackDown really quick. Monday Night Raw got an interesting dynamic going on with the title. Looks like it's going to be maybe a four-way dance. They did something that made the fans happy, or maybe not happy, with Kevin Owens re-signing.
Yeah.
I think I called it on the Pro Wrestling Podcast show the other day. I said that I really feel like Kevin Owens was going to stay. I think Vince or WWE, I don't think they can let any more big names go. And it looks like, I think they just re-signed Sami Zayn too. So Kevin Owens is staying. He's in the title picture on Monday Night Raw. Like they got a four-way dance going for their day one pay-per-view. Why they decided they're going to do 2 pay-per-views in January, I don't know. The Royal Rumble is the one. Probably Royal Rumble and WrestleMania are my 2 favorite WWE pay-per-views. Is anyone else looking forward to this day one pay-per-view? I'm not really too sure. Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar, things heating up on SmackDown. Paul he got super punched and knocked out on SmackDown.
I love that. I think them doing a pay-per-view on New Year's Day, I thought it was genius. Because you think about it like this, and I know like Nick Khan has went on different shows and talked about this, and it actually does make sense. It's like New Year, like Christmas Day and New Year's Day, you're not doing anything at all. You partied the night before, you're home, Your family's home. Why not put on something, especially if you love sporting, like a sporting event? You're going to put this on. You're going to be entertained for a couple of hours, and you're going to just shut it off. That's what they want. They want the entertainment factor of the whole thing. And, WWE played this smart, because if you think about it, like here in New York, the day after Christmas, right, we have a Christmas show here at Madison Square Garden, right? So like now we actually get to see that main event that we were supposed to see of the triple threat match, but we get it in the cage. Yeah. Right? People are gonna get hyped. They're gonna talk about that online. It's gonna lead into day one. Now you have the fatal 4-way. Boom. We're gonna see another one. We're gonna this time without the cage. You know what I mean? And you're gonna be entertained with that too. And I think like I can see Big E still being champ, but I see this storyline continuing on.
Yeah.
It's
interesting. Like it's why Starrcade was always on Thanksgiving for so many years before, and then that the big holidays, especially in the Southern territories for wrestling. The holidays were always big days for wrestling shows. I mean, the last up until the pandemic, Wildcat Sports, we were doing shows on Christmas Day. The idea was, on Christmas, the only thing that's open is the movies, and that's it. So you open presents in the morning, but then what do you do in the afternoon? So we would go like, hey, well, we're going to have a wrestling show. And then we would always, draw in all these big crowds from people in New Orleans. So I think from that same sentiment of like doing a New Year's Day, people stay up late New Year's Eve. Maybe they take off work the next day, especially it's going to be on the weekend here. What do you do on that day? Hey, well, we're going to have a show. So it'll be interesting to see how well it does or doesn't. I think it's a good idea. I mean, they did do maybe 10 years ago or so, the New Year's Revolution show. They did a couple of shows in early January. So they have done them before, but never on like day one of January 1st. So
well, Kenny,
and there's a lot of college football. I was just gonna say real quick, there's a lot of college football on, but most of it is early. The big games are early. So I mean, I don't think they'll have too much to worry about there as far as the ratings go, but
Right. Well, Kenny called it. He's saying Big E's holding on to the title and for day one. He's going to carry the belt into 2022. Sammy, what do you think? You think Big E's going to hold on to that belt?
Well, so last year, Drew lost the title right before WrestleMania to Bobby Lashley. And then because Bobby Lashley had never been champion before and he really deserved it, it created that awkward thing where Drew lost at WrestleMania as well, which I didn't really care for. And I think the argument you could make is that you didn't want to take the title off of Bobby Lashley too soon. But it did make sense for Drew to go into WrestleMania challenging for the belt as opposed to maybe defending it.
Right.
But if you look at it from that perspective, does it make more sense for a 2-day WrestleMania where they're trying to put 100,000 people into a building twice for Big E to go in as the champion? He doesn't really feel hot right now. That doesn't mean that they can't heat him up. I just think that they could, if they wanted to, put Big E and keep him in the main event picture, but maybe it would be better for him to be chasing the title as opposed to holding on to it. So from that perspective, not because I think they need to take the title off of Big E because they don't think it's working, but maybe because they want him to chase for it, that maybe this will be a scenario where they can take it off of him and it'll protect him and put it on someone like Bobby Lashley or put it on someone like Seth. Yeah. I don't think that Brock Lesnar's winning. I think that.
Wait a minute. Who are you calling for
I think that if you're gonna beat up Paul for a plan, the best way to do it is to maybe just hit him once on the face, and then know that Brock Lesnar will make the save before you hit him with a chair. If you look back on the moment, they didn't put the boots to Paul. It was one Superman punch and then he was down. I think I would be shocked if it's not a swerve.
It's like a timeout.
I think that Paul is walking out with Roman still champion. So if that's true, then Brock Lesnar needs an opponent for WrestleMania. So, you could do, I don't know if it's Lesnar and Big E, Lesnar and Edge, Lesnar and Bobby Lashley. I mean, people have been wanting Lashley versus
I would love to
Lesnar for a while. So if you want to do Lesnar versus Lashley and you need a title match for Lesnar, you can put the title on Lashley. But you could also do Lesnar and Lashley without the title,
Oh, yeah.
So, so it's interesting. And then you've got that. Yeah, and that Kevin just signed. So are they going to throw Kevin a bone and put the title on him, maybe just to say like, hey, I thought the biggest thing about him leaving was the Owen Hart tournament. Like, I really thought that was like, you could argue almost like a way to entice Kevin over. Like, he's not going to be participating in that because obviously he resigned.
Yeah.
But I think, people put a lot of stock. Like, I don't think that WWE is a terrible place to work in the sense that, like, no one there wants to be there. There were people that didn't want to be there and they're not there anymore. But I think a lot of people that are there do want to be there. And I think that Kevin is one of those people. He just is frustrated that he's not doing as well as he would like to be, And then obviously Seth Rollins, they could put title on him, So I don't know who I think is going to win. If I had to put money on it, I'd say Lashley. But it's interesting. I'm glad that I like that I don't really know, because a lot of times if you look back, this December, January period, like when people are concentrating on the holidays, is usually the time when WWE will put titles on people that they normally don't. Like, Edge cashed in around this time. You got Jeff Hardy won the title for the first time around this time. There are a lot of guys where, like, before WrestleMania season, they'll do like a little thing, like almost like an experiment. Like, hey, let's see how this works. Like, well, we'll change titles just to kind of see how the fans react. So it wouldn't surprise me, like, if there was ever a show where, like, I don't really think that they would put the title on Tony Storm or on Liv Morgan or on Kevin Owens. Like, if there was ever a show where it felt like, well, they can, and then they got plenty of time between now and WrestleMania to change it. You can change it back at the Royal Rumble. You can change it back at, Elimination Chamber, whatever has happened in between.
The next night on Raw. I mean, which they've been known to do. So,
and if you really want to make an impact on day one, like a story, like if you missed the show, which I'm sure they're going to do. I think they have another Saudi Arabia show too. So, like, they could do. It's interesting that, like, as you said, like, I don't know how excited people are for the show or not. And a lot of times when shows are like that, that's usually when they do a lot of kind of newsworthy, interesting things to make people regret that they weren't hyped up for it, kind of thing. So it'll be interesting to see.
I think because of the contract signing, I'm going to call it for Kevin Owens winning the belt on day one. Yeah. I just don't be shocked if KO walks out with the belt. And, KO and Big E feuding, I mean, I think they could make that work. I think that could be good. Or you could keep all four guys in the title picture, Seth Rollins crying about he getting screwed or something because it should have been a one-on-one match. You could really keep this going and keep Bobby Lashley in the mix too. I like it when you got multiple guys in the mix for the belt. To me, it gets a little stale. It gets a little boring when you got one guy against one guy. Roman Reigns' storyline is interesting because of the bloodline and Paul Heyman, and I'm curious to see where they go with this. I don't know. I like you said, Sammy, I like not knowing, especially with Raw. It's like you're going to probably surprise either way they roll the dice. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they have a license to. It's an unfortunate thing that there isn't as clear of a thing. Like, it's a very different picture than it is on SmackDown, where Roman feels like the opposite. It's like how Lesnar was a few years ago. If there's anybody that could beat Roman, it's Lesnar. Like, it's not impossible for Lesnar to win. It's just back on Lesnar, and you're basically back to where you were a few years ago. What do you do after that? It doesn't change there's the only person that feels like that could beat Lesnar is Roman, and vice versa. So you're basically in the same place no matter who wins that in terms of going to WrestleMania. I think it's possible that it'll be Drew, and I think Drew versus Lesnar could happen, but obviously I think it's more interesting for it to be Drew versus Roman. But I don't know what the thing is, but so Raw is more kind of up in the air. Like, they don't really have even though Big E's been the main guy for a while now, he hasn't been the dominant kind of presence on the show. It feels like they're still kind of figuring things out still, which isn't great for ratings and interest, but it does create this opening for they can basically do whatever they want because they're still kind of figuring things out, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited.
Keep us guessing. Keep us interested in guessing.
Amazing year. 2021 has been a great year for wrestling. I want to thank you guys for joining us today. Sammy Kiss out of Wildcat Sports out of Texas, where everything is bigger. Kenny, I mean, I could talk to you guys all day about wrestling. I mean, we're
Yeah.
Kenny, we'll go ahead and wrap the show up with you, man. What are you kind of seeing for WWE? What do you think about Roman Reigns and Lesnar? Where do you think that's going? We're kind of heading into WrestleMania season.
I can see Roman still retaining the title at day one. I don't really think they're going to take it off of him right away. I can see this feud going on to maybe Rumble and maybe him losing at Rumble, you know. But I don't know. It's like WWE is so unpredictable, you know, at times where you're just kind of thinking to yourself like, yes, like Roman has been carrying SmackDown and the Universal title for like, you know, for a year now, and then all of a sudden they could just give it to Brock, and you know, and Brock could be that guy because everybody's cheering for him now. Before, nobody was cheering for Brock Lesnar when he was coming out.
Right.
Everybody was booing him, you know. And like, now it seems like Brock Lesnar is like your savior now.
Yeah, they were going wild, man.
Yeah, of WWE, you know. But like what Sammy said, like I would love to see, like for me, I would love for Brock Lesnar to lose at day one, possibly go to Raw and challenge Bobby Lashley, because like that's the match I want to see. Even if we don't even get it at WrestleMania, like give it to me at Rumble. You know what I mean? Like, because we can't get Keith Lee into any of these matches. You know, I would have loved to see Keith Lee versus Brock Lesnar and have that feud from Rumble come back. You know, but obviously we'll probably see that. I can see Keith Lee coming back to WWE eventually. You know.
Well, in the wrestling business, as they say never, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So for day one, I say Roman still going to be champ, still going to be head of the table. And then moving forward to like say Royal Rumble, we could possibly see another rematch between these two guys again, and I can see maybe this time around, you know, Brock Lesnar being champ. You know.
Yeah.
Well, you heard it here, folks. We got Kenny from the Call Up Podcast, Sammy Kiss, Wildcat Sports, and everything Texas, right? Sammy, go ahead and. You got any shows you want to plug coming up? Let people know where we can find you online.
Yeah, well, I know that my home promotion with Wildcat Sports is in New Orleans, Louisiana, and we're about to start opening up the school back again soon. So if you're in Louisiana or New Orleans, if you're ever interested in becoming a professional wrestler, now is the time to send us a message, because we're going to be starting up and we're going to get things going soon, having shows back in Louisiana soon, which is really, really exciting. So, you know, email us. We're at wildcatsports.com, Wildcat with a K. And then in Texas, things are getting huge. I know that Reality Wrestling is going to be back in Dayton, Texas on January 2nd. I'll be there. Hurricane Pro Wrestling is going to have a show on January 22nd in Beaumont, Texas. And then New Texas isn't going to be back until February 26th, which is going to be in Houston. So, and then a bunch of other stuff, which is, you know, I could stay here and literally there's like 7 or 8 shows in Texas every Saturday, all month long. Like there's so many, you know, I mean, Texas is a big state. So, you know, it just depends on where you are. Like, you know, West Texas and East Texas are nowhere near each other. That's an 8 or 9 hour drive. But
I got a lot of family in Texas, Sammy. I got to get out there and catch some wrestling.
Hey, if you're down, you know, just let me know and hit me up. You know, I'd love to come say hi and talk wrestling. You know, it's a great time for Texas wrestling, a great time for wrestling in general. You know, there's so much talent out there. You know, there's a lot of women's wrestling promotions. Thunder Rosa's Mission Pro Wrestling. They're doing a lot of stuff out of Houston. Title Match Wrestling does a Ladies Night Out series, which wrestles all over Texas and in Florida and on the East Coast and stuff like that. So there's a lot of great stuff going on, you know.
It's awesome.
Well, where can we find you at online, man? My son wanted to drop in.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at the Sammy Kiss, and I'm on Facebook as well. You know, just, you know, say hi. I'll say hi back. But yeah, Sammy Kiss on all the social media.
Awesome. And Kenny from the Call Up Podcast. Great show, by the way, man.
Thank you.
I love all the stuff that you post. Kenny's like, it seems like wrestling all the time. He's always posting somewhere. So
yeah,
like
I found you. I found him on Instagram, so I'm gonna be I was looking at the page earlier,
Right.
but yeah. So
Yeah, Kenny, you gonna be at any shows coming up? Checking out any?
So most likely I'm still thinking most likely I'm going to be at AEW Dynamite for the new year. Definitely going to be at the GCW show at the Hammerstein. I'm actually going to be talking to two people from that show. Is it Nasty Leroy and Effie? So just look out for those. Besides that,
where can we find you?
So you can find me on Instagram, obviously at the Call Up podcast. There, you can find me the same handle for Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I'm even on TikTok doing like news reports, like just like updating stuff there too. What else? And then you can catch me on Mondays. I do a live watch along of Monday Night Raw. It's like me and Toe Tags from the Knuckleheads. We do Monday Night Raw watch alongs every single Monday. We start at 7:30, just doing like general conversation, and then we break down the show as it goes, along. Wednesdays I have a roundtable discussion, which I'm gonna bring back. That's every Wednesday at 7:00 before Dynamite.
Nice.
Anybody could jump on. So if anybody's watching this here, everyone's welcome to come along. That's why a lot of people love it, because it feels like a family thing, So even if you don't want to be on camera, you could be in the chat and you can say your piece, and I put your comments, on the screen. So, everybody interacts with everyone, and we kind of just like break down like the last couple of nights of wrestling, maybe some news. We talk a little bit of life at the same time too. You hear my kids in the background, which I'm so surprised that they're quiet right now, But yeah, other than that, just check out the interviews when they come along. I have, hopefully we get some more interviews like I did over the year, and I bring some more.
Fantastic. Well, Sammy, Kenny, thank you so much for joining us today. Sorry about
really appreciate you guys.
Difficulties.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
That's technology, man. Hey, I am your host, Tony Twist, joined by my co-host, Alex, the sports mouth of the 313, representing Detroit, Michigan. And that's a wrap, fellas. Thank you very much, and we're out of here.
Appreciate it. Yep. You guys have a blessed day.